So this is Socrates' speech in the Symposium. He talks just after Agathon has finished talking, and he actually starts questioning Agathon, and he uses something called the Socratic Method, which is basically a load of questions which build up to an answer that he kind of has already predicted. So he asks him a load of stuff, and eventually Agathon comes out with the answer that Socrates is looking for. And he starts off by generally saying how love has to be of something. Just like if you're a son or a daughter or a father, you have to be a son of someone or a daughter of someone, etc. He claims that love is the same idea. So he says, is love of something or nothing? And Agathon says, of something, surely. And then he says, well, then surely, if love is the love of something and you desire something, then generally if you desire something, that means you don't already possess it. He says, does he possess or does he not possess that which he loves and desires? So if you desire something, it means you don't already own it. And what he's kind of leading up to here is the idea that if you want something, that means you can't already possess it. He says, he who is anything cannot want to be that which he is. And he also gives the example here of the idea of someone being rich but wanting to be rich. It just doesn't happen. If you've got something, that means you don't desire it, you don't want it anymore. And then as we go on to page 13, he then links this back to love, because he says what love is the love of beauty. So if you love something, you love it because you think it's beautiful. And therefore, if love is like a desire and you want something you don't already possess, then that means that love is of something which a man wants and doesn't already have. If you want something, that means you don't already have it. So if you love something, you desire something, that means you must not already have it. So that means if love is the desire of beauty, then love can't already possess beauty. He says love wants and has not beauty. What he means by that is if love wants beauty, that means it can't already be beautiful. And as well as beauty, love also seeks something good. You generally love what you think is good. And also beauty and what is good are linked together. He says, is not the good also the beautiful? And so therefore, in wanting the beautiful, love wants also the good. So he's come to a bit of a tricky conclusion here, and he's asked Agathon a series of questions, which have basically ended up in Agathon admitting that if love is the desire of beauty and good, then that means love must not already be beautiful and good, which doesn't make an awful lot of sense when you think about what all the previous men have been saying in the Symposium about how love is a god and love is the greatest, most beautiful thing of all. Because surely, if love involves desiring those things, then it can't already be those things. Now, it may be that you really strongly disagree with Socrates' argument here, and if you think about it too logically, it does start to fall apart, and it doesn't make an awful lot of sense. But as long as you follow the kind of basic pattern of what he's saying here, that's the main thing. And then at the bottom of this page 13, he starts talking about a woman called Diotima who has previously had a conversation with him and advised him on what she believes love is. It's interesting that in ancient Greece, he's talking about a woman and her philosophy and how wise she is. And she talks about basically an argument that they've had previously about love. And he's discussing with her the things that he's just discussed with Agathon, which is that love cannot be beautiful and good if love is all about desiring beautiful and good. And Diotima has said this to him, and he's then said to her, well, does that mean that love is evil and foul if it's not already beautiful and good? Which obviously doesn't really add up, because how could love be evil and foul? And Diotima kind of has a bit of a go at him at the top of page 14 and says, well, no, it's not the case that just because something isn't beautiful, it's therefore foul. She says, do not then insist what is not fair is of necessity foul, or what is not good is evil, or infer that because love is not fair and good, he is therefore foul and evil, for he is in a mean between them. And the first kind of main point of her argument here is that love is this idea of a middle ground. It cannot be fully beautiful because it desires the beautiful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's ugly and that it's foul. And And what she says to Socrates in this conversation as well is that if he's claiming that love isn't beautiful and good, then love can't be a god either, because she says here the gods are happy and fair. And she says, how can he, i.e. love, be a god who has no portion in what is either good or fair? So how can love be a god if the gods are supposed to be good and beautiful, but love isn't? And again, it's all about being a happy medium. She says love is intermediate between the divine and the mortal. And at the end of this paragraph, she sort of says that love is like a go-between between the gods and mortals, but love is neither mortal nor divine. It's kind of a bit in between. And the big long paragraph at the end of page 14 is her description of how love came about and how it ended up being this kind of middle ground. Because love was born of plenty and poverty. And it was born on Aphrodite's birthday, which is why Aphrodite is linked to love. But because it was the child of plenty and poverty, that means it's neither wealthy nor poor. She says at the bottom here, love is by nature neither mortal nor immortal, but alive and flourishing at one moment when he is in plenty and dead at another moment. He is never in want and never in wealth. He is in a mean between ignorance and knowledge. So because his parents are plenty, so wealth and luxury and beauty, and poverty, so being poor and having nothing, that means love is then a middle ground between the two. And then he says that Diotima has explained to him why he made this mistake. She says, you're getting love confused with the idea of the beloved, so someone that you love, rather than the concept of love, because the beloved, she says, is the truly beautiful and delicate and perfect and blessed. If you love someone, you think that they are absolutely perfect. But the person that you love is not the same thing as the idea of love itself. And then she talks more about what an actual lover is in this second paragraph. And she said, you've acknowledged that love is of the beautiful, so you love something that's beautiful. And she goes on to say that if you love something that's beautiful, you want to possess it, you want to own it, you want to have it. And she says, what is given by the possession of beauty? And the answer here is happiness. If you possess beauty, if you possess something that is good, which is another word she uses as well as beauty, then you're happy. And she says the happy are made happy by the acquisition of good things. So you are made happy because you've acquired what it is that you desire, and that usually is something that's beautiful or good. And she says that doesn't mean that everyone who is happy is a lover, just because they've gained what they want, because she lists other examples, people who are after money making or gymnastics or philosophy, some sort of randomly specific examples there. They aren't lovers. It's just this very particular type of lover who seeks beauty for the reasons of love. Only they can be called a lover. And our kind of most important conclusion here is this idea that love then is of the possession of the good, that's what you seek, but also not just the possession, the everlasting possession. So you want to have something that's good and beautiful, but you want to have it forever. And that to her is what love is. And she summarises that at the top of page 16. Love may be described generally as the love of the everlasting possession of the good. And that's kind of her overall conclusion. But she takes this into a bit more detail, because how then do you possess the good forever? How do you make that everlasting? Because as mortals, we can't last forever because we all die, obviously. So she's saying here that actually the only way that you can have immortal beauty is through procreation. Procreation, which must be in beauty and not in deformity. The only way that you can be happy forever and possess the good and the beautiful forever is by procreating. And Socrates asks her why of generation. It just means why of procreation. It's another way of saying it. And she says, because to the mortal creature, generation is a sort of eternity and immortality. The only way that we can be immortal as mortals is by procreating, by producing children. And then she goes on to say various bits and pieces about animals that aren't very important. But at the bottom of page 16, She says to Socrates, "Marvel not at the love which all men have of their offspring, for that universal love and interest is for the sake of immortality." So don't be amazed by the fact that people love their offspring, because that's the only way that they can possess something forever, that they can create the idea of immortality. But she then goes on to criticize some people. Well, not necessarily criticise, but she gives kind of other examples of procreating. And she gives this example of the immortality of fame. She uses some mythological examples here, so you can spot Achilles there, Patroclus. And she says these people create their own immortality, not through creating children, but by doing something that then is talked about for years after. Achilles, in several ways, you could claim to be immortal because we still talk about him now. And she mentions the most obvious form of procreating, which is through offspring, through children. So she says here, offspring, as they hope, as people hope, will preserve memory and give people blessedness and immortality. But she talks as well as about being physically pregnant. She says that souls can be pregnant. She says souls which are pregnant, for there certainly are men who are more creative in their souls. Clearly men can't become physically pregnant. But she talks about impregnating your soul. And she says the best way to impregnate your soul is by giving it wisdom and virtue, and to seek temperance and justice. So she's heading down a more philosophical focus here. So she's not talking about physical pregnancy, she's talking about impregnating your soul with wisdom. And she talks about writers. She mentions Homer, who we know, and she mentions Hesiod, who's another writer. And she's saying the way that these people made themselves immortal is not by producing children, but by producing works, by producing texts, by producing writing. She says, who would not emulate them in the creation of children such as theirs? So she calls their stories their children, because they've preserved their memory and given them everlasting glory. So that's the way in which these writers, obviously Homer, an oral poet, rather than a writer, but still the idea is still there. They've produced stories which have made them immortal. That's kind of their version of children. And then here we go. She then talks about how you can become the best philosopher, because if the best way of impregnating yourself is by impregnating your soul and creating something wise and glorious which will last forever, then you should become a philosopher. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in the second video.